Hi, welcome to Permian Basin Master Gardener Greenhouse Tours. My name is Suzanne Roland. I'm a Permian Basin Master Gardener and also an AgriLife Extension Agent for Andrews County, Texas. Today our special guest is Debbie Roland. Thank you for joining us, Debbie.
You're welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. We're going to take a tour of her greenhouse, but before we do that, we want to show you the makings of a greenhouse that they have started constructing. So Debbie's going to tell us a little bit about what's going on here with a new greenhouse that they're building.
Okay, this is actually my second greenhouse. This is my first one. And these blocks all came out of a raised bed that was originally here. And we hired somebody, my husband dug ditches all around that were about 1.5 feet wide. And we hired someone to come in. And you can see this concrete is laid in between these footings, and the concrete goes down under the ground with about 1 foot, and it's going to be this high above the ground. You can see it's about probably 15 inches. And the purpose of this is I'm going to come in. The door is right here, and the rest of it is concrete. And I'm going to enter through this door, and I'll have 30-inch wide beds that will grow actually in the ground. They're not going to be raised beds. They'll be in the ground all the way around. And my plan is to grow vegetables year-round in this greenhouse, which I've never done before. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I think I can learn. There is a man in Midland who sort of grows vegetables. My greenhouse is not going to be exactly like his, but I'm going to have lighting. I've got water that will come off that faucet over there and be buried and come up inside the greenhouse. And it will be heated, and it'll have a swamp cooler in it in the summer for the humidity and the coolness. There'll be a door and 2 windows on the south side. That's the south direction. And a window on the east side. I'm not having anything on the west side. And the purpose of that is that there's a big fruitless mulberry tree right here. And that fruitless mulberry gives a lot of shade in this area. So I'm hoping that I can get by without a window on that side. But the forms are due to come off in just a few days. And my husband has the frame built for the greenhouse. And we're going to, the siding on it will be this stuff right here. So we have ordered that from Mueller. And they have it in stock, and they're great to work with on things like this. I guess that's it.
Well, I'm curious. So you've chosen this as your siding.
This part up here.
Now, does that allow enough sun to come in to penetrate the plants?
I don't know. Supposedly it does. I didn't want the clear because there is so much heat in this area in my yard. It's kind of strange because I have created sort of not intentionally, with this metal fence and a metal building right there. This goes all the way around. Of course, the house is here, and this big tree. This is sort of a microclimate in this area right here. And there's a strawberry bed over here. I don't know if you can see that, with onions growing in it too. Strawberries and onions grow really good together. And I keep it watered, but not a lot in the winter. And it grows year round in that area because it's heated in that area basically all day. And with all the concrete and the metal, it holds the heat during the night from the day.
Debbie, you mentioned that you are going to be planting in the ground versus a raised bed. So can you tell us what kind of soil are you going to use? How are you going to prepare that?
Well, I originally had a raised bed here. And so the reason I had sectioned that off with the cinder blocks and the bricks was partly for aesthetics, but mainly because I was taking that soil and I was amending it. And that's a big thing. You can't grow if you don't amend the soil. All my soil in my flower beds all over the yard have been amended through the years. I became a master gardener in 2013, and that's when I learned about compost and mulch and how important that is, and worm composting, which I've incorporated into this as well. The soil that is in here was not moved out because I've spent 8 years amending it, and I didn't want to get rid of that soil.
Sure.
It has a lot of compost. It looks like normal soil, but it's got a lot of worms and compost and different things in it that I've added through the years, perlite and stuff like that. And I wanted to use that inside in the raised bed, in the beds that I'm going to be growing vegetables in because it's already got the amendment process started.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your own compost. Do you have a compost bin here?
I did. I don't at this time, but I understand that you can put a compost bin inside your greenhouse, and which I plan to do in the center, and that will also help heat it in the winter because the compost bin is generating that heat,
Right.
and it'll go out, and then you have your compost already in there.
That's a great idea. I never thought of that. Wow. Okay. Are you going to mix any of the indigenous soil in?
Yes, I will leave what's there. I'm going to move this over to the side, and it'll be, probably this deep because I'm going to lay those cinder blocks in between the beds. And that's what will keep the water in there where I don't have to water in the pathways. There won't be water there.
Okay.
And where I'm stepping in mud all the time. And so this is part soil and part compost. And I've got mulch in there too through the years. I've added mulch to that raised bed, and it's kind of in there in the center. So I'll add more compost when I plant.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot plant and grow anything successfully if you don't amend your soil.
Right,
in West
especially
Texas.
here in West
Yep,
Texas.
you cannot
That's
do it.
exactly right. So when you talk about mulch, are you referring to leaves? Are you referring to wood chippings?
Both.
Both.
I get leaves off. Obviously, I have fruitless mulberry and trees in the front, and we gather the leaves and put them in the raised beds, or I have raised beds back there, but they'll go in here in these beds this time, and those go in and through the winter. As they come down, I use surprisingly a broom and a dustpan and just dump them in to my raised beds. It works really well. And then I add compost that I buy at a big box store and mulch. And I use pine bark mulch, small.
Okay.
That's small, not the large because it takes too long for it to decompose. Yeah.
Right. Do you ever have your soil tested before you amend it?
I did have it. Well, I did originally have it tested through AgriLife.
Okay.
And because we did that as trainees.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of knew what I had. And surprisingly, the soil is pretty good right here.
Wow.
So we don't have any rock or anything.
Okay. And I know if you ever need to get your soil tested, you can contact your local county extension office, and they'll come and get a soil sample and send it off to A&M. And that's very helpful when you start gardening to know what kind of soil that you're dealing with, so you know how to properly amend it.
And it's inexpensive.
And it is very inexpensive.
Yes.
Ma'am. You mentioned having a compost pile in the middle of your greenhouse, and I got to tell you, that's the first time I've heard of that, and that just sounds so ingenious. So could you tell us a little bit behind that thinking? I know that you mentioned it does provide heat, which it does, because that's the decomposition process happening. But tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, actually, it's kind of my idea, but I've noticed it since on the internet. I didn't really understand that this was a thing. But when I end up with all these beds in here, in the center, I'm going to put a 3x3, which is the size a compost bin should always be, and a wire that I got at a Master Gardener green compost class. It'll sit right in the middle, and it'll sit on the ground. A compost bin should always sit directly on the ground, and that way the worms can come up, and the roly-polies and other bugs, some more desirable than others. And as I put my kitchen scraps, which that'll go in there, and I have hay occasionally, and I keep chickens, and I have miniature donkeys. That manure will go in here, and I'll just add and when you compost, they show you pictures always on the internet that it's layers. You have to have a layer of this and a layer of paper and a layer of that. But it doesn't really matter.
Right.
As long as it's all in there and it's mixed up and you're turning it, that's all that matters. Because you can't keep it in layers, obviously,
right,
if you're going to turn it. So you put it in there, and the worms will come up, and the roly-polies. And as they eat that stuff, it begins to compost, and that generates heat. And composting is basically just rotting. It's
right,
going to, what you're going to produce at the end is something that looks a lot like a potting soil. And you can actually use that. Leaves are wonderful in there. You can use that before it's completely composted, as long as it's had some heat in there. And when you take the Master Gardener compost class, you also get a thermometer that you can keep in there. And when it gets to 160 degrees, that also kills any weed seeds or whatever. You obviously don't want weed seeds or Bermuda seeds. Those are the worst in there. And so it's generating heat the whole time as it's composting and rotting. It'll generate heat, and obviously, if the thermometer is showing 160, that's going to generate heat inside that greenhouse. Okay. And so, at the end of that, when the heat will start to go down, and that tells you through that thermometer that the composting process is starting to calm down. It's done. And so, at that point, you can take that and you can put it just on the top of the beds. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the worms will go over there and they'll begin to come up and they'll eat what's in those beds as well. And as I cut things back, I'm going to leave I cut back a tomato plant, for instance, as long as it's healthy and not diseased in any way, you don't want, anything bad on there. Like if it's got worms on it or whatever, that has to go out. But I'll trim those with scissors into pieces, and I'll put those in the top of the beds as well. And that will compost and make better soil. I just continue to improve the soil with the plants that are in there.
That is so neat. And I know that, so in a compost pile, we can use grass clippings, we can use leaves, we can use kitchen scraps. What can we not put in a compost pile?
You should not put it. I don't put dairy, and I don't put meat. And those will compost. You can we have a master gardener who puts dead chickens in his. And that will compost, but that also will draw in weird critters into your yard and smell bad.
Right.
So a compost pile that's working correctly will not smell bad. It'll just smell kind of earthy. Mm-hmm. And cardboard can go in there as long as it's small pieces. And I have a paper shredder that shreds into 1/4-inch squares.
Okay.
And so you put that in there. You don't want too much paper, but you can kind of tell when it's working. It shouldn't smell bad. And once it starts working, you'll get the hang of it. And it's kind of a trial and error thing. Mm-hmm. What works for one person in one place because of where their bin is located. Mm-hmm. It might not work for me inside this greenhouse. So I'm just going to have to kind of play with it and see. This is a total experiment. I've never done anything like this before.
Those are the best kind, right? So tell me, do you keep it covered? Because I have a compost bin at my home. It's outdoors, and so I keep it covered.
If it's out, that one will not be covered because it's going to be inside. Mm-hmm. But out here in the sun, it absolutely has to be covered. And the reason for that is because we live in such an arid climate, and it's so hot, and it has to be like the consistency of a wet sponge. It's what you want. You don't want to touch it because you need to wear gloves when you're working in your compost bin. But as you turn it and work with it, it needs to be the consistency of a wet sponge. You shouldn't be able to wring water out of it, but it needs to be moist. And so the only way to do that is keep it covered. And in the normal 3x3 wire bin that master gardeners give away at a class, the sides should be covered as well. Like inside, I line it with cardboard or carpet or something. And then across the top, you're going to also cover it with cardboard or carpet or even a tarp on the top. And you're going to get enough wind, the way the wind blows in West Texas, that it'll seep in around those coverings that you have on the side and on the top. Uh-huh. And that's going to be plenty of air to get in there.
Okay. And you mentioned turning your compost pile. What tool do you use? I know I use a pitchfork.
Right.
And the bigger it gets, it kind of gets a little difficult to turn.
It is. It's heavy.
Yes.
And I use the 3-prong, like a hoe, on the 3-prong thing, and just get in there and kind of move the stuff to the center and then spread it back out. Okay. So I go down as far as I can, but most times I can't get all the way to the bottom. I just don't have the body strength to do it.
Yes, ma'am.
It's hard.
So you have been a master gardener since 2013?
Yes.
Okay. And you, I believe, are a specialist in compost?
I am.
Okay. So if you have any questions about composting and how to make it, amend it, make it right, Debbie is the one to ask. And then I know a lot of people are wondering, well, how do I become a master gardener? So here in the Permian Basin, how would someone become a certified master gardener?
You get on our website, which is westtexasgardening.org, and you can click on an interest thing on that page, or you can call either the AgriLife office in Midland or Odessa. And in Midland, Jeanette Castanon is the leader and of the master gardeners. She is the one who manages the class and sorts everything out, schedules classes, and signs people up. And she's the person to contact in the AgriLife Midland office. And it's well worth it. I've never it's been the most fun thing I've ever done.
You know, I have to agree with Debbie, because since I became a master gardener, I've met wonderful people who have the same interests I do in experimenting with gardens and learning how to grow things. So if you're at all interested in growing plants, vegetables, whatever.
And you know, people think that if you don't know anything about gardening, you can't become a master gardener. I didn't know anything. I was sweeping my flower beds with a broom before to keep, you know, there was nothing there. And I thought, oh, that looks so nice, that, you know, my beds are so clean, but I couldn't grow anything. And so I took the course because I retired, and that's what I had always planned to do when I retired. And so I took the course and I learned to grow things, and that's wonderful. But I also met wonderful people, and there's nothing you can trade for that.
Hey, Debbie, you mentioned water and that you're going to use a swamp cooler.
Right.
Okay, and so I'm just curious, what kind of water will you be using here?
Well, in this area of Ector County, I live in Gardendale, and we are privileged to have a water company here, a corporation that, you know, is a co-op type thing. And my house actually runs off that water, which we pay for. And but I also have 3 water wells. I have 2 in the back and one that runs the windmill out front. And the 2 in the back are tied together, and they come and they water all the trees and all the plants that we have and animals that we have on this 5 acres. And the electricity is coming, it's wired through the ground. See it underneath that bottom rail over there? That's the electricity, and it comes over here and it goes to this greenhouse, the first greenhouse.
So you're going to tie off
we will tie box in there. Right, we'll tie off from that electricity and run it through here.
Okay.
So it will have electricity.
Okay. So are you at all concerned, since you're using well water in a swamp cooler, are you at all concerned about the hardness of the water? And
yes.
Yeah.
And but I also have a rainwater harvesting tank on the other side that I think we will probably move in here. And I collect rainwater in these buckets off the roof in the gutters. Okay. And I use that when it's available to water the plants in the greenhouse. Of course, in this greenhouse, I don't have as many plants as I'll have in here.
Okay.
So,
have you thought about, because I know we've thought about it at my home, at my house, is using like a sediment tank from the water well, a sediment tank where the sediment settles, and then taking that water and using that into the swamp cooler?
I haven't thought about that, but that's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. We really don't have a lot of sediment here. Okay. That we had the grape trial out front originally, and those plants did really well with the water well that we have. So, and my plants in my yard, you can't tell in the winter, but my plants in the yard do really well too.
Okay.
So I haven't had a problem really with the water here.
All right. Do you need a special kind of I'm sure you don't need like 3-phase electricity or anything
no.
that much. Okay.
No. I'm not going to be using that much electricity in there.
Right, because
the winter will be, the winter will be the hard part, because I do plan to put a heater in there, use space heaters. So that will use more electricity than anything.
Okay. I know that at the greenhouse in Andrews County, we use the heating mats. And I seem to think...
The ones that lay under the plant?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And I think they use less electricity than the lights.
Right.
Because I have grow lights at my house, and my electricity bill has gone out the roof because of the grow lights.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. We're going to go ahead and we're going to check out Debbie's greenhouse. So come on inside. This
is my first greenhouse, and it is an older greenhouse. It's 8 feet by 8 feet. And it was constructed like this. This is the way I got it. My son lives in the hill country, and he lived in Austin. And I went to visit him after he and his wife moved there. He got out of the military and moved directly to Austin. And his next door neighbor had this greenhouse. And so there was a wooden fence, and I spent my whole weekend looking through the holes in the fence and looking and wanting this greenhouse. And so I was showing my husband, look, this is the size greenhouse I need. I had just become a new master gardener, so I had a lot of enthusiasm about plants. And so he said, I don't know if I could build that greenhouse, I think. And so I told my son, he was like, Mom, come in the house. And so after I left to come home back to West Texas, he met the neighbor. And he was telling the neighbor was using the greenhouse for storage. It was stacked with cardboard boxes and lawn equipment and rakes and mowers and whatever. And so he met the neighbor, and he told the neighbor that I was wanting him to know where he got the greenhouse. And he said, well, I built it and I've never used it for a greenhouse. It's all set up and I've never used it. And Bradley said, well, she was wondering because she really liked it. And he said, I'll tell you what, if you will take the greenhouse apart, your mother can have it and get it out of my yard. So my wonderful son took the greenhouse apart, put it on a trailer, and brought it to West Texas and set it up right where it sits now. And it had, of course, it is made with wood. It's got electricity already into it. It pulls air from here, and there's an exhaust fan up here that pushes, in the summer, it pushes the heat out. Normally in the summer, I keep the door open, and I don't grow anything in here in the summer, which is why I wanted the second greenhouse, so I could grow in it. But these plants are all normally out in my patio in the summer, and I've just cut them back in the last 2 weeks. And I'm also having an experiment this time. I've put in the grow light, and thanks to my husband who did all the work. And I'm seeding lettuce, and I've got cilantro here, and this is romaine lettuce. This is basil that I planted coming up, and this lettuce is due to come up just any day. Over here, I've seeded some cherry tomatoes, and this is Juliet Hybrid. It's a tomato that's also very small, and as you can see, it's starting to get its new leaves. These first leaves are the cotyledons, and these new leaves come up, and as soon as this plant's about 2 inches taller, I'll thin it out, and these are the ones that'll go into this greenhouse that we're building. These are my winter plants up here that just winter in the greenhouse. But what I did is I went in, I put potting soil that I got at a big box store, and it filled it up, this container up about 2/3 of the way. And then I just took a slice of tomato. It was a large tomato. Took a slice and I laid it in there and covered it with potting soil. And then I made sure it was wet all the way to the bottom and dripping out the bottom, which I put these plants in here normally where when I water these, they'll drip here. And when these start dripping, they'll water the plants down here. So I'm not wasting any water. And this is wet. And in about a week, the tomatoes started growing. And I think because these plants are so green, and they're probably the greenest tomato I've ever grown out here, that the slice in there is decomposing and feeding this tomato. And so it's obviously doing really well. I've trimmed it up because you don't ever want your foliage to touch the ground. That can cause fungus and bugs and stuff you don't want on your tomato plant or any other plant for that matter. Bell pepper needs to be trimmed off the ground. And this is doing really well. It's got 3 blooms here and another one at the top. So I believe when I transplant it into this greenhouse when we're ready, I think it'll be about a month, that I'll be able to stake this and continue trimming where the foliage is all off the ground. Obviously on a tomato plant, everybody probably knows this, but you'll get suckers that come in between your branches here. This is one right here coming out, and those need to be pulled off or cut off, however you do it. And because you don't want to feed foliage that is not going to grow fruit. And so everything up here, I will trim everything off. Oh, there's 3 more right there.
Look at that.
Everything up here, I'm looking to grow fruit this summer in that greenhouse.
And I know when you transplant tomatoes, like Debbie said, you want to remove that foliage, and then you want to plant 2/3 of the tomato into the ground.
Correct.
Okay. You've also got a grow light. Can you tell us a little bit about this grow light?
Sure. This is new this year. I also read on the same site that you could grow in cardboard boxes. My husband has a business that has a lot of cardboard boxes, so I've cut them. I've just filled them with potting soil, and I've gone in and put seeds in. Lettuce seeds are so small, I didn't even bury them. I just scattered them across the top and spread them out with my hand. I've thinned them out in that box. This box is due to come up any day. And I put this grow light in, and it has helped. But I think probably the sun has helped as well, because I'm not sure about the grow light. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm in the process of building a greenhouse, and so right now I've got plants in my bedroom. and not my bedroom, but I've removed everything out of the bedroom, and I have like 200 plants in my bedroom, and I've used grow lights. And my experience with grow lights is you need to make sure you have the right amount of wattage. And generally speaking, one grow light will not provide enough wattage if you're growing inside. And like Debbie said, it's really the sun here that is helping grow these plants. So make sure you know how much wattage you're getting if you're growing inside, and it'll tell you on there how much is required for different kinds of plants. But I will also say my electric bill is out the roof. So get a greenhouse, utilize what nature gives you, and utilize your sun for electricity. Debbie, I know that orientation of a greenhouse is also something to consider when you're building a greenhouse.
Well, and I know that that's true, although I have to say when I put this one in, this is the only place I had to put it. So this greenhouse faces south. And so I'm pulling air from the north and blowing it out the south. I've never had a problem. This greenhouse gets really hot because it doesn't have any air conditioning or anything, really a good flow. And part of that may be because I'm up against the house here and I have the solid fences all around. I think that may be part of it. But I'm surprised at how much air I do get here because we live out and we don't have other houses or buildings blocking the wind like people do who live in town. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times I'll have a 60-mile-an-hour wind hitting this fence over here. And so this is facing south, and I think that's ideal. I'm not sure. But this one will be all sides like this, and the door will be on the north, actually. So that's why I've got windows, quite a few windows in that greenhouse so that maybe the breeze can come through and blow a lot of it out. And I won't have to use the swamp cooler so much in the summer.
And if I'm correct, I believe that when considering orientation for your greenhouse, you do want your greenhouse facing south in the wintertime because that's where it gets the most sunlight. So what a wonderful little greenhouse. And if you could do something different, what would you do in here?
Well, this greenhouse comes without a floor. This is concrete because this is a patio that goes all the way around my house. So if I could do it different, I would set it out on the ground where I could have more access to growing in the ground, which is obviously what I've always wanted to do since I'm building the second greenhouse. But I would change that and I would move it farther probably away from the house so I get more breeze around the whole thing. But it's hot in here in the summer. You have to do something. It gets up to about 150 with the door closed. Mm-hmm. Very hot. Yes.
I noticed that you do have a circulating fan.
I do.
And that's because I know it's very important to keep the wind or the air circulating and helps develop the stem on the plants.
Right. And in my new greenhouse, I'm going to have a ceiling fan with really large blades that will circulate, that will use less electricity, I think, than the swamp cooler. So we'll see how that works. I may need both in July and August.
Yes, ma'am. And is there anything in here that you absolutely have to have in your new greenhouse that you just love?
Well, I didn't put shelving in my new one because I was thinking I was going to be on the ground and getting up and I would hit my head the whole time I was working and that would be irritating. So, but I do love these shelves because they have space between them for the water to drain. Mm-hmm. And my husband actually his hobby is welding. And so everything he does is in metal, not wood. So I'm hoping that I can get him to build shelves that are about this wide and that go along the south wall of the greenhouse, kind of up about this high, where I can start new plants to go in and replace those. Because I'm going to need to be reseeding plants for my fall garden to go inside there at the same time I'm growing the summer garden.
Right. You got to have shelves, I think. I think you also have you need to have a nice big work area.
Right.
And then a working sink.
Right. And I have a sink here. Mm-hmm. I have not hooked it up. So, because I have access to water 10 feet away.
Right.
So it's never been an issue. Mm-hmm. But there is piping here that comes in and goes around and we'll feed that sink if need be. And it's just PVC pipe. It's not it's not real fancy.
Not real fancy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, what a beautiful little greenhouse. Just a hobby greenhouse, a backyard hobby greenhouse. All right, well, we hope you've enjoyed our tour today of Debbie Roland's greenhouse. We thank you so much for taking the time to bring us here and We ask you all to continue to follow our greenhouse tours. If you have any questions, please reach out to the Permian Basin Master Gardeners. You can also reach out to your local county extension office. Thank you and happy gardening.